was listening to a podcast by a gentleman by the name of Jay Shetty, and he had
Yes.
a trauma specialist on by the name of Gabor Mate, and his take on vulnerability was actually, I think, really interesting because I feel like it might add some flexibility. And so what he described it as, he said vulnerability is your capacity to hurt. And I thought that was a really good kind of tweak on it because if you look at it as weakness,
Hmm.
you're going to move away. But if you look at it as like a capacity for hurt or almost a pain threshold, I think that's something that a lot more men can kind of adapt, like latch onto.
That was Khan Bouba-Dalambaye, and in this first ever conversation of the podcast, he discusses his role in teaching about mental health, along with the importance of understanding and normalizing vulnerability. He also shares advice for achieving better mental wellness. Hope you enjoy. Khan, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk to me this morning. I'm really happy because one, we've been talking since I think it was March. I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I shared this idea with you and you were like, sure, let's try this out. Let's go for it. But you were like, let me pick your brain first. So we set up a call and, we had a long conversation. It was about an hour. We were just getting to know each other. And now we're here. So I'm really happy to share this first episode with you. Khan, you are a mental health consultant, an expert in equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. You also specialize in multicultural counseling, stress management, anxiety, depression, and interpersonal relationships. Khan, what does it mean to be a mental health consultant?
I get a few questions about it. So I think being a consultant looks different depending on like your field or what you do.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think the way that I frame it is that my being a consultant is my kind of, I guess, leveraging my knowledge and experience, and I guess through that wisdom in what I do. So taking the fact that as a mental health professional, I have a unique kind of subset of information and knowledge and understanding. And so taking that and applying it to support organizations, companies, academic institutions, groups, so on and so forth. The way in which I kind of support them is very varied, but that's more or less what I would say it is.
Yeah, we spoke about that during our call. You said you're kind of an intersection between, I forgot the exact wording, but it was like, I am a Black man in different spheres that can help assist many different institutions in many various ways. I'm kind of botching that, but is that
No.
what you were
So
getting at?
that was more or less it. So it's a combination. I think for my mental health experience is really just from for 2024, about just under 15 years of kind of clinical practice and working. And then so as a mental health consultant, it's general mental health and then Black mental health as well. For Black mental health, it's a combination of like my experiences, what I've learned, work with clients, and then just myself, personal experience. And then for consulting, it's a nice mix. So it's taking like the research and the work that I've done in terms of inclusion and DEI, as well as the work that I do as a mental health, as well as existing as a Black male in the society, and kind of bringing that together in this weird Venn diagram. And so where they intersect is kind of what I'm able to offer people and what makes me, I guess, a bit unique.
And what you offer is, you teach a lot. So I remember during our call, you were talking about the reason you do what you do is because of the teaching aspect. Could you talk about what you love about the teaching?
Yeah, I think what I came to realize outside of just wanting to help people, I think what I came to realize about what I really enjoy about my work is like teaching or educating, imparting wisdom or knowledge, helping people through whether it's changing or adding perspective, understanding, so on and so forth. And so by understanding that was something that was really drawing me to what I did, it also explained why I've made other choices and then subsequent choices in my career. So I think the teaching aspect you saw in my work clinically or working as a guidance counselor, it's the reason why I love coaching. It's the reason why I ended up going into teaching for 2 years part-time at CEGEP. And then like even with my consulting work as well, it's still kind of this sharing of knowledge and experience and adding perspective. And I think that's something that really nourishes me. So it'll probably be a theme throughout my career.
Khan, when you meet with your different clients, who are you usually speaking to? I know you spoke about Black men, but who do you usually help?
It's a weird mix, and it's not deliberate. I think it's just the way my career has gone. So there's definitely a good amount of space in my practice where for I would just say Black individuals as a whole, regardless of how they identify. And then over the years, I think in large part because I worked like about 10 years as a guidance counselor. So a lot, I would say 75% of my practice is probably young adults and adolescents. So like high school, CEGEP, university age. Surprisingly enough, which is actually quite odd, I would say 80% or slightly more of my practice is all male identifying as well. But again, not necessarily planned or deliberate. I think it's just word of mouth and then how things kind of like flow and navigate. So it's just kind of turned out that way, and it's been like this default niche. There was a few clients who had spoken and said that like one of the things, reason why they even tried it or kind of reached out is because they didn't believe they could see someone who kind of looked like themselves. And I think for a lot of Black people or Black men in particular, I think seeing themselves reflected makes it a lot more comfortable and I think it makes it a lot more inviting. And so I
Yeah,
think it's worked in that
definitely.
sense.
So one of the reasons I was really happy to have you on is because you work with many Black men or people from the BIPOC community, and a lot of us kind of have, due to society and many different reasons, this kind of rigid view of masculinity, which kind of which doesn't give way to being vulnerable or vulnerability. Could you talk about that struggle between intersecting or merging vulnerability with being a man, a true man, or whatever it means to be a man?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's unknown, but or some type of big secret. But yeah, like there's a lot of, for if we're just really speaking about heterosexual males, there's a lot of men who really kind of hold on to this idea that being vulnerable or allowing yourself to be vulnerable equates to weakness. And because look, I think universally as human beings, I don't think anybody wants to feel that way. And I think the connotations of using the word weak or weakness, like it automatically serves as this barrier. And so they see going to therapy and being supported as a form of weakness because it requires vulnerability or because it requires admitting not just that you have a problem, but you have a problem that seemingly is bigger than you and that is
Yeah.
making you feel some type of way. And it's interesting. I don't necessarily, well, there's been some clients who, like, with you have the right rapport of challenge, but it's really interesting because I find it fascinating that I can relate to and understand, but I find it fascinating that so many men would hold on to this notion that vulnerability or being vulnerable is sort of synonymous with weakness. But at the
Mm.
same time, the reason why for a lot of men are unwilling to be vulnerable is because it's difficult. Because sitting with that
Mm.
emotion or accepting the fact that something might be overwhelming or bigger than you, or the fact that it might cause you to emote or feel some type of way is actually really hard and
Hmm.
uncomfortable and unfamiliar because of the way that we're socialized in society. So what I find curious and fascinating that I've actually challenged some of my clients is you say that being vulnerable is weak, yet you avoid vulnerability because it's easy. And I was like,
Mm.
I've never understood being strong as taking the easy way out. And it gives some people cause to pause. And I think for a lot of men, sometimes they might feel that if you kind of lean into vulnerability, that it automatically shatters your masculinity or it automatically changes who you are. And what I say to my clients is that I'm not trying to necessarily change you. I'm trying to make sure that you're equipped to respond to any situation. That's
Hmm.
very different. And like the reality is you can't sit in front of me and tell me that there isn't a situation that you've experienced or that you can imagine where you're going to feel some type of way, where you might cry, you might feel sad, you might be upset, you might feel scared. And I'm going to go, there's a reason for those emotions. You don't want to stay there, but you move away from sitting with that because it's oftentimes not modeled and you've heard these messages of what it is to be masculine
Yep.
and it's unfamiliar. And so you move away from it because it's difficult, not understanding that you're further reinforcing that cycle because you can't develop this skill that is being able to sit with discomfort and vulnerability and to express it if you don't practice, right? And then it just reinforces it because if you're not practicing, you don't have the skill and it's more overwhelming, and then you feel the need to move away. I know it's a bit long-winded, but if you don't mind me adding, I was listening to a podcast by a gentleman by the name of Jay Shetty, and he had
Yes.
a trauma specialist on by the name of Gabor Mate, and his take on vulnerability was actually I think really interesting because I feel like it might add some flexibility. And so what he described it as, he said vulnerability is your capacity to hurt. And I thought that was a really good kind of tweak on it because if you look at it as weakness,
Hmm.
you're going to move away. But if you look at it as like a capacity for hurt or almost a pain threshold, I think that's something that a lot more men can kind of adapt, like latch onto. And what he described is that vulnerability is essential for growth, right? Like you don't grow, and he uses the idea of a crustacean. He's like, in the same way a crustacean has a shell, and that shell is designed to protect, that crustacean cannot grow within its shell. It constantly goes through this process of changing its shell and shedding it and finding a new one which it can grow into, and then so on and so forth. And so I found that fascinating, and I've kind
Yeah,
of
I love
adopted
that
that. Like
analogy.
it's a capacity for growth, and that you can't grow in something that's so rigid and hard and callous. Like you need to find a way to give space. In the same way my mom always told me, all wounds need air and exposure to heal.
So not only is that analogy, I'm gonna stick with that, and I'm I'm going to probably write that down. But we know that the stigma is it's less there, whether we're talking about it, the Black community or any community. But
Well,
how? Yeah.
depends. I think
Okay.
I mean
Yeah. Go ahead.
it's gone down,
Okay.
but and across the board, but I think in certain communities, and I would identify the Black community as one, I still think it's still really kind of high, like that rigidity of what it is to be a man and like talks of vulnerability. Fortunately, it's still really prevalent.
What's the way forward then?
What's the way forward? It depends who you're thinking for. Because if you want to
Okay.
say specifically with Black men,
Yes.
I think normalization.
Okay.
Like I of
Of
vulnerability.
correct.
I think
Okay.
that it's it has to be normalized, and you see that more and more. But I think normalizing where you see Black men in general, community leaders, role models, celebrities, so on and so forth, normalizing like holding space for that. Not just in terms of like supporting campaigns or like, Bell, let's talk, but like just normal, everyday, casual talk that allows space for that. And I think it's interesting, and I'm not trying to kind of make this about myself, but
No, go ahead.
this will be related. When I started my practice, someone had asked me like, who you feel are the clients that like you connect with the most and it's the easiest and it flows. And I said, oh, easily women or female identifying, like for sure, hands down. And over time, my answer changed, and it's actually
Hmm.
men now, or those who identify as males. And I think for what it is exactly when I say normalizing. I think for the reason why my client base is so predominantly male is because, well,
Yeah.
word of mouth, but I think it's also that we do talk and we do show that we hurt. It's just usually like it has to be with the boys or the squad, which are ride or die or the day ones. And it's like maybe
Tight knit.
like when it's really at an extreme point, maybe a couple, one, two drinks. And then I'm not trying to promote like necessarily consuming, but
No, no, no.
regular
Go ahead.
times where you let it out. And so I think why people gravitated to me is that it's this kind of hybrid where like I can still come off or represent or allow them to see that like, no, you're still a dude, you're still a guy, right? But you have this way of kind of simultaneously holding dialogue and narratives and language around emotionality or being sensitive or vulnerability, but it doesn't look or feel weak. It doesn't look or feel foreign. And I think a lot of guys essentially like do want that. It's just like, and it's usually like someone they're super tight with, but if you can get that feeling, it makes it a lot easier. So I think it's normalizing it.
Okay.
How do we find a way where masculinity is held with that as well? And I think with that, definitely seeing more Black males within the field of mental health, I think will go a long, long way.
Part of this project is to have open discussions around just mental health in general. I know that's a broad term, but my thinking is the more we have people in the public space just talking about the issues that they're struggling with or their wins, their losses, just prioritizing their well-being. If that window can open a few centimeters more every day, I think we can get to a point where that is looking like a vulnerability is out there and people are opening up and getting to a space where it's just normalization, like you were saying. How important do you think, though, is it to get there?
I think it's essential. I
Okay.
think that like, and sometimes I feel like it's very cliche, but like if you
Okay.
go back to the pandemic and George Floyd murder, I think
Hmm.
what that did was I think it kind of ripped some scabs off for our community, and I think it allowed people to realize that there's a lot that was being kind of tolerated or suppressed or like kind of pushed away, that sooner or later people realize like, no, enough is enough, and we need to do that. And so what I've tried to do is just change the language around it. So I
Okay.
don't like, as much as I address it as mental health, I also make sure, and like when I speak to people, I'm like, don't look at it as necessarily as mental health. Like mental health isn't universal. What's universal is well-being and wellness. What's universal is feeling good. What's universal is being healthy. What's
Mm.
universal is healing. And
Mm.
so, like, I wouldn't necessarily frame it about like vulnerability, if that's something that word is too like charged. I would say like, listen, like, let's talk about the struggle. Let's be real, right? Like, let's talk about the fact that like sometimes like the difficulty of like just being us. And I think if you frame it differently, right? Like if you ask anybody, like, your overall, I care about your well-being. Like, how you doing? Like, are you well? Anybody can relate to that. And so I think it's essential, but I think it has to be authentic. Like, I think it has to feel like it's our own. And so everything from the way that it's done, whether, the language around it, I think that, and I've talked to like academic institutions about not looking at it as this one-on-one format of healing, right? Like we're a collectivist culture, right? Like a lot of our healing, or what is usually addressed as in mental health and other communities or cultures, is done by the church, right? But it's still communal. And
Yeah.
so like group discussions and talks and whatnot, I think. And so I think if there's a way to kind of make it our own in terms of the format and the language and literally who's leading it, I think that'll really help. But it is essential because we are still a marginalized and oppressed community within the society, and you cannot deny the consequences or the impact of existing as such. And so in that way, I think most Black people would acknowledge that and be like, cool, don't call it mental health. We're
Yeah.
marginalized, we're oppressed, we are under the weight of systemic and institutionalized like racism, right? There is a history that has carried us. And so to that end, if you can acknowledge that we have a lot to deal with that is sometimes very unique to us, cool. Just get people to acknowledge. Doesn't matter what the language is. And then yeah, and I think through that, like, it has to happen though. And you're seeing it. You are seeing it.
Yeah, which is great, because I know you were mentioning that we're still kind of in that sphere of not breaking the stigma, but as you said, we're getting there. But what would you tell your younger self who's kind of struggling to prioritize their mental health or any sort of issue that you're maybe
Um,
going through?
I think I would tell myself that, like, and this is based on my beliefs, but I think I would tell
Yeah.
myself that while there's a certain maybe value or strength that comes from doing so, I don't think that human beings are designed to deal with all of their problems by themselves. And
Okay.
so I would remind, I think, my younger self of that. And that, yeah, I think I would remind my younger self of that. And I think I would frame it more in terms of perhaps what I stand to gain. So instead of looking at like the detriments, I might like tell myself that your opportunity, not just for success, but for well being, your opportunity to truly be happy or to flourish or to regularly have access to joy is
Mm.
predicated on yourself and your own like wellness state. And I would say, remind myself that no matter what you deem to be more important than your own well-being is the foundation for whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so no, like, you need to prioritize that. Nothing should be, well, maybe family, kids, but like for the most part, nothing should be really put above that. And it's not about being selfish. It's about taking a sustainable approach. And hopefully my
Hmm.
younger self will take that to heart.
Because it is a journey. Khan, thank you so much for the time this morning. Is there anything else that you may think that should be mentioned in just in this discussion that you think is relevant?
For people who feel that at times maybe kind of addressing the things that they gotta keep ahead of is too difficult, I often tell my clients will often say easier said than done, and I always reply yes until you
Okay.
start doing. I don't know if anything
Yeah.
else is really coming to mind, but
Hmm.
maybe I'll
That's
text you or email you if I can think of something.
Amazing. No, but listen, like I said, I'm really appreciative, and I always look forward to discussing with you, and we'll definitely chat more soon because I follow your work. So
Thank you, and good luck. Good luck with the podcast. It's a great
yeah,
initiative.
we'll see where this goes, but just thought it was important to put that out there, and if people connect with it, then so be it. If they don't, then we're still gonna do it. Regardless. But I appreciate the time, Khan. Thank you so much.
Of course. All the best.
Big thank you for tuning into this first ever episode of the podcast. I'm so happy you made it here. Feel free to share your thoughts, your comments, feedback, anything that's on your mind. It's very appreciated. If you like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe, but especially don't forget to grow your growth. Love.